What if the secret to a nation's wealth isn't its gold, oil, or geography, but the invisible rules that govern it? This year's Nobel Prize in Economics just revealed why some countries thrive, while others stay trapped in poverty. In 2024, three economists, Daron Acemoglu, Simon Johnson, and James Robinson, won the Nobel Prize for answering one of humanity's biggest questions. Why are some countries rich and others poor? Their answer challenges everything we thought we knew about economics. It's not luck or location or even intelligence. It's the institutions that shape societies. In this video, we'll break down exactly what their research found, how it changes our understanding of prosperity, and what it means for the future of the global economy. Stay until the end, because their findings might completely change how you see power, politics, and progress. For centuries, economists have tried to explain why countries develop differently. Some pointed to geography, saying tropical nations struggled because of disease and heat. Others blamed culture, claiming Western societies valued work and innovation more. But these theories couldn't explain everything. Why did South Korea become a technological powerhouse, while North Korea, right across the border, fell into poverty despite sharing the same language, history, and resources? Why did Botswana prosper in Africa while its neighbors struggled? Acemoglu, Johnson, and Robinson set out to find the real answer, and what they discovered flipped the old explanations upside down. In the early 2000s, these three researchers started digging into hundreds of years of historical data from colonial archives to modern economic records. They found a consistent pattern. Countries with inclusive institutions, systems that allow citizens to participate, innovate, and hold leaders accountable, became richer and more stable. Meanwhile, countries with extractive institutions, where power and wealth were concentrated in the hands of a few, stayed poor. So, what exactly does that mean? Imagine two countries starting at the same point. In the first country, the government protects property rights, encourages education, allows businesses to compete freely, and ensures fair laws. In the second, a small elite controls everything: land, money, and the rules themselves, using power to stay in power. The first country, they said, is inclusive. It creates opportunities, rewards effort, and builds trust in the system. The second is extractive. It extracts wealth from the many to benefit the few. Over time, the gap between these two worlds becomes enormous. Inclusive nations invent, adapt, and grow. Extractive ones stagnate, fall into corruption, or collapse entirely. This is why the United States and Western Europe surged ahead after creating strong democratic institutions, and why former colonies with corrupt or authoritarian systems struggled for decades after independence. To test their theory, Acemoglu and Johnson looked back to the era of European colonization. When Europeans arrived in the Americas, Africa, and Asia, they didn't treat every colony the same way. In places like North America or Australia, where the environment was healthier, colonizers settled permanently and built institutions resembling their home systems' courts, schools, and parliaments. But in places with high mortality rates for settlers, like the Congo or the Caribbean, colonizers didn't stay. They focused instead on extraction, mining, plantations, and slavery. The result? Centuries later, those early institutional choices still shape the economies of those regions. Nations with inclusive systems continue to grow. Those born from extraction are still catching up. Their famous paper, The Colonial Origins of Comparative Development, became one of the most cited works in modern economics. It fundamentally changed how economists think about development, from geography and resources to governance and power. But there's a twist. Even if everyone agrees that inclusive institutions are better, they're incredibly hard to create. Why? Because those in power rarely give it up willingly. Acemoglu and Robinson call this the political commitment problem. A dictator might promise democracy, or a rich elite might promise reform. But unless the system forces them to keep those promises, they often revert to protecting their own interests. They argue that progress happens when society reaches a critical juncture moments of crisis where change becomes possible. Think of the Glorious Revolution in 1688 England, which limited royal power and strengthened Parliament, or the American Revolution, which embedded property rights and self-governance. In contrast, revolutions without institutional reform, like many in the post-colonial world, simply replace one elite with another. One of the most powerful messages from their research is that economic growth isn't just about economics. It's about politics and inclusion. It's about who has a voice and who doesn't. When citizens can organise, vote, and demand accountability, societies tend to innovate and invest in the future. But when power is locked in the hands of a few, creativity dies, talent is wasted, and economies eventually collapse under their own inequality. You can see this pattern today. Compare Singapore's controlled efficiency to Nigeria's struggle with corruption, or Scandinavia's strong institutions to Venezuela's political chaos. It's the same story. Institutions decide the fate of nations. But this research isn't just data and graphs, it's personal. Daron Acemoglu, born in Turkey, grew up witnessing economic crises and political coups. That experience made him question how power and policy shape societies. Simon Johnson, a former IMF chief economist, saw firsthand how countries recovering from financial crises could rise or fall depending on their institutions. James Robinson, from the University of Chicago, spent decades studying Latin America and Africa, seeing how political structures drive inequality. Their collaboration was more than academic. It was a mission to understand the real-world roots of prosperity. Zero. Together, they wrote Why Nations Fail, a book that became a global bestseller. It made economics accessible, showing that the difference between success and failure often lies not in chance, but in choice. Here's the paradox. If we now know the recipe for prosperity-inclusive institutions, accountability, democracy, why don't all countries adopt it? The answer is as uncomfortable as it is real. Because creating inclusive systems means redistributing power. It threatens those who benefit from corruption, cronyism, or centralized control. Many governments talk about reform, but few truly reform themselves. And even when change begins, it's fragile. Institutions take decades to mature. They can crumble overnight through coups, populism, or political manipulation. Acemoglu calls this the narrow corridor, the thin path where state power and social power balance each other. Too strong a state, and you get tyranny. Too weak, and you get chaos. Only in that narrow corridor can freedom and prosperity survive. In 1950, both had similar populations, cultures, and histories. But one built inclusive institutions, property rights, education, democracy. The other built extractive ones, dictatorship and central control. Today, South Korea's GDP per capita is over 25 times higher than North Korea's. Both are African nations rich in diamonds. But Botswana's post-independence leaders built transparent, rule-based systems. Zimbabwe's rulers centralized power and suppressed opposition. Result? Botswana became one of Africa's most stable economies. Zimbabwe faced hyperinflation and collapse. These aren't coincidences. They're consequences of institutions. The Nobel Committee recognized Acemoglu, Johnson, and Robinson because they connected history, politics, and economics into a single framework, proving that development is not destiny. Their work redefined the field, giving policymakers a roadmap to understand why reforms fail and how they can succeed. This isn't just an academic breakthrough, it's a global wake-up call. It tells us that no nation is doomed by geography or culture. It tells us that progress isn't inherited, it's built. Brick by brick, law by law, institution by institution. So what does the 2024 Nobel Prize in Economics really teach us? That the fate of a nation lies not in its natural wealth, but in its institutional health. That democracy, justice, and fairness aren't just moral ideals. They're engines of prosperity. And that the biggest question of our time, How to make growth sustainable and shared starts with how we design the rules of the game. The next time you hear about corruption, reform, or political struggle, remember, it's not just politics. It's the foundation of every economy's future. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe and check out the channel to find more amazing and new videos.